I started 2026 with 149 books on my Kindle to be read. So I've decided to start a Clear the Kindle series, and in this vlog I'm going to be getting through the first few books on that list. I am a complete mood reader, so there is no rhyme or reason to which books I have read on this list. Let's get started. Okay. So the first book that I want to tell you about that I've read on my Kindle is Hummingbird, Salamander by Jeff Vandermeer. So this is an interesting premise. It's like a climate change sci-fi thriller set in somewhat of a bit of a future, almost dystopian, but not quite dystopian, verging on apocalyptic by the end of the novel. And I really wanted to like this. I thought the premise was so interesting. A woman receives a gift of a stuffed taxidermy hummingbird with a letter that basically suggests she needs to find a salamander. And she has like this personal connection to salamanders through her brother who died when they were young. And it sets her off on this whole journey of trying to discover the salamander. She discovers that this woman was some sort of eco-terrorist who gave her the gift, and that her family are embroiled in all sorts of corporate big money schemes. And so there are people after her because they want this all shushed up, really. And this should have been brilliant. Like, I thought that was such an interesting premise, but we have a very unlikable narrator. And I don't think having an unlikable narrator is that bad of a concept. I quite like a morally grey, unusual narrator. But in this case, it was to the point where I couldn't quite understand some of the decisions that she was making. It was like this mission was so much more important to her than her family, than her child. And I do understand that there are women out there who are not maternal. They may have children, but they are not necessarily maternal. And so in that case, it would make sense. But I struggle to empathize with that. I struggle to identify with that because that's just not who I am. Like, I couldn't imagine doing the sorts of things that she was doing, putting her child in danger. But then I also don't necessarily think that she was unmaternal. I think we were supposed to feel that she was somehow trying to protect her daughter or something. I don't know, but it didn't really make any sense to me. And then there's the prose. On the level of the sentence, I found this quite difficult reading. I don't know if it's just Jeff Vandermeer's style of writing and whether his other books are the same, because I had originally thought, I might want to pick up another one of his books to see how I get on with it, or whether this is something that he specifically utilized in this book to create some sort of effect. And I don't really know what sort of effect it was creating, because all it meant was that I kept having to go back and reread sections. And I've got to say, considering this is only a 300 and something page book, it took me so long to read because I just didn't really want to pick it up. It felt really slow going, considering it's a thriller, considering, it's supposed to be fast paced action. It didn't feel that way. And it felt like a bit of a chore to read. So I've given it a 3 because the premise is fantastic. And I don't even necessarily feel like it landed the ending. It was a bit of a ending. I think the setting in like this society that is burying its head in the sand over climate change was interesting. And the way in which you feel like everyone's just trying to carry on as normal when basically the world around them is burning, that was really interesting. So it does some really interesting things, but I think I can't give it more than a 3 because I didn't really enjoy the reading experience. But that is another book read from my number. Let's move on to the next one. Right. I've read another book down. The next one that I have read on my Kindle is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Is that her name? Now, I have to admit, though, I did use the Libby app to read this one. I was listening to this while I was out walking the dog, which I think was actually quite a good way of doing it. I wonder whether I'd have enjoyed it as much if I had just purely read it on my Kindle. But anyway, this was, I think, a surprising 5 stars from me. I went into it very skeptical. And the reason I was skeptical is because this was published, I think, in 2021. And I think my fear about it was that it might be almost like a jumping on the bandwagon. We were going through a very Me Too phase. And whilst, of course, we have to listen to accounts of Me Too, I did worry that outside voices might jump on this as a trend just to sell something. Like, that's what I was worried about. I was worried that this was a jumping on to sell, like a capitalist jumping on the Me Too thing. Anyway, hopefully that made sense. But so I went into it very skeptical, but I really enjoyed it. And what I really particularly liked about it was how nuanced it was, and how, because of the protagonist that we have, which is a woman who has been abused but doesn't necessarily believe that she's been abused, that is not how she thinks she has experienced this relationship that she's been in. She has quite an unusual perception of how other women who are coming forward with their stories present themselves. So she thinks that some women don't deserve to say that they've been abused because of the level of the abuse that they've had, like that it's too low or something like that. And I thought that was a really interesting way to frame it. It's not framed in a way that suggests that's how the author feels. It's definitely looking at the mindset of this woman. And it was really interesting to me after I finished reading the book to find out that this was a book that the author had written when I think she said she was 17 when she wrote it, and over, say, a decade, she rewrote it, she redrafted it, she really honed it, and she learned so much. So she learned about the effects of PTSD and the symptoms of PTSD, and then rewrote the book to include those things. And I think that's what shines through, is that this is such a nuanced account. Like, it really does cover so many different areas within this awful thing that's happened to this woman, and different experiences from other people who've experienced similar things, and how those experiences can seem so different, and yet they're basically the same thing. And I feel like I've gone on a bit there. But yes, I thought this was really well done, but it's written a bit like a thriller. And I always use that to mean the pacing is quite quick. You will consume this, like you will devour this. And I think that's what's really good about it. And I think that's why it's part of sort of popular fiction. Yes, it's very dark in nature, but it's very readable and it fits within that sort of popular fiction genre. And yet it's done so well. I think it's really crafted well. And I think the time that it took the author to write it shows. So that was a 5-star. So we've had 1 3-star, 1 5-star. And I think we've probably got time for one more, but in this reading vlog. Okay, we got the final book for this reading vlog. I have just finished The Wall by John Lanchester. This is a dystopia in which we're in a sort of future Britain where a wall has been erected the entire way round the United Kingdom, with the idea that it's going to keep out others, so basically refugees. And the reason that it has been decided that we need to keep out these others is because climate change has essentially wrecked the world, and people are fleeing their home countries for a land that is still relatively safe. And they're trying to storm the walls, they're trying to get in. Measures are being put in place to stop them. And one of those things is the erection of this wall, and then young people are being drafted into mandatory service to man the wall. They have to do a 2-year term manning the wall, killing anyone who tries to get over. And the punishment for letting someone over, for someone getting through whilst you're on duty, is that for everyone that gets over, somebody either has to be dead if they get killed in the action, or if there's any extra people, 1 for 1, somebody has to be sent out to sea. And I think this is quite interestingly done, because it opens the first half of the book. It really opens as a rumination on the mundanity of being on the wall, the greyness, the cold, the lack of taste in the food, the length of time that they have to be out on watch, 12-hour shifts out on the wall, with basically a never-ending view of the sea. And I live by the sea and I love the sea, but if all you have to look at is a vast expanse of sea and sky, that is quite monotonous. If you've not even got the rest of the cliffside to look at, you're just looking out to sea and to check for anyone who's trying to get over the wall. And it's done quite poetically. There are sections that are done like concrete poems, with, shaped poems, and it goes into that idea. But I actually kind of feel like the shaped poems don't make sense in this context, because we find out later on that one of our protagonist's friends from the wall really wants to be a literature teacher, and so it would make sense having these concrete poems if we were reading from that man as a protagonist rather than the one that we have, who is less interested in literature. I think that was a bit of a slip, I think, on the part of the author, really, because it doesn't make sense for our character. But overall, I thought that this first section was really interesting, and particularly the ruminations on how we've always lived a life where our parents are the voice of experience, and they're the ones saying, oh, when I was young, it was much harder. You've got it easy now, kid. Whereas in this reality, that's flipped, because the parents have never had to do this enforced service. That is something that only the children are experiencing. And so there's a rift between older generations and the generations that are having to perform this duty. And I thought that was interesting. And I also thought there was a section where they're on a week's leave and they're on the train, and there are people who are just a few years older than our protagonists, looking at them and this idea of a slight bit of respect for the fact that they're having to go through it. These people have already gone through it. There's a shared experience in that look. And I thought those little sections were so powerful and so interesting. So that first section I thought was really great. Afterwards, I feel like the author went, oh, actually, I need to have a plot. It feels like the plot is an afterthought, and the plot becomes a little bit meandering. There were certainly sections that shocked me and that I thought were really powerful because I wasn't expecting them. But the weird thing about this book is, and I don't think it's ever happened to me before, I got to the end of the book and within 2 days, I cannot remember how we left those characters. What shape are they in? I know the location that they're in, but did one of them die? are they both well? The ones that are left. What's happening at the end? I cannot remember. And that has genuinely never happened to me before. Like, I might have a book where I get to a few months down the line and I'm like, I can't remember how that ended, but it's more, I can't remember at all, like, where these people are, what's happened. This, within 2 days, I can't remember what the end is. And so I'm sort of veering between a 3 and a 3.5 on this one, because I think it opened so strongly and then didn't know where it was going with that, but it was quite a strong opening. So yeah, this has been a mixed bag of a review. Just to let you know, then I've started 2 more books on my Kindle. The first one, which I am actually reading on the Kindle, is The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. I'm really in the mood for horror, and I have realised I own very little horror. I own some horror that's literary horror or gothic horror, but there's not true horror. And I feel like The Book of Accidents is basically the closest thing I own that's actually true horror. And that might not even be, I might have completely misinterpreted that, but I'm really in the mood for horror. So I started that one. I'm 12% in at the moment. And then through the Libby app, I've also started How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie, which I've only listened to the prologue and I think the first few minutes of the first chapter. But so far I really like the tone, and I really like that the audiobook is narrated by someone who is British. I know it shouldn't matter, but I do like a British accent over an American one on my audiobooks, particularly if they are British books. So those are the 2 that I'm currently reading, but we are 3 down. I have officially checked off 3 more books from my Kindle TBR. So see you next time.